Today, you will learn the ultimate blueprint for finding multi-million-dollar A/B test ideas for your D2C e-commerce brand. Now, we'll go through real-life case studies from brands like Dr. Squatch and Laura Geller, and many others as well. Those are brands that we've helped grow through very strategic full business conversion optimization strategies. And today, you will learn the step-by-step method for finding those test ideas. Now, not only will you learn how to find those test ideas, but if you've had so-so results from conversion optimization, this process will help you get through it and above those plateaus. You'll learn how to identify what's working in your funnel and what may not really be working, and then how to fix it, of course. You'll also learn how to stop wasting time running a bunch of A/B tests that doesn't really move the needle. And then ultimately, the goal of all of this is to help you grow, help you scale, help you accelerate customer acquisition through website changes and A/B tests that actually works. Now, if you're wondering why should you listen to me, well, I'm Raphael and I'm the founder of Splitbase. We've been running conversion optimization programs and A/B tests for the past decade with some of the fastest growing brands in e-commerce. I'm talking brands like ButcherBox, Amica, Glamnetic, Macage, L'Oreal, Kiehl's, Dr. Squatch, and well, many, many more. Now, this is the process that we've used with these brands. So let's first start with step number one, which is we really need to first understand what is a good test idea and what is a bad test idea. Once we go through this, you'll have the foundation to truly understand, how to determine what you should test and what you shouldn't test. And then I'm going to walk you through the exact research methodologies, and that's coming in just a second. But first, what you're seeing here is a testing trifecta. Ultimately, it states that testing, which is at the top, should always be supported by both analytics and human data. Now, a test without data is a test that shouldn't be prioritized. It's a test that may not be solving a problem. It's a test that might just be a gut feeling or a preference thing. And if you've got some of those tests in the pipeline, they should be deprioritized. Now, the more analytics and the more human type of data sources, qualitative data sources that supports your test ideas, well, the more they are worth testing and the more likely they are to succeed. Now, what are those research sources? What type of analytic research should you conduct? And what type of human research should you do as well? So before we even dive into the actual research, what we want to do is we want to put ourselves in our customers' shoes. And we want to conduct what we call a heuristic analysis. Now, the problem that a lot of people are doing, and the issue here, is that often they're conducting a heuristic analysis, and that's their research process from which they get their test ideas from. And that's a faux pas. Because at the end of the day, no data points other than just your experience going through the website actually supports these things. But ultimately, when we usually start looking at a website, we want to identify kind of where the website stands. Is there anything that, we think could be improved or that are weak points, right? So ultimately, you'll want to evaluate and go through your website and look at 6 pillars. Those 6 pillars are relevancy, trust, clarity, usability, persuasion, and then offer. Let's dive into each of those really quickly. So trust is all about the elements that build customer confidence in your brand, product, and purchasing process, right? So you'll want to go through your website and do that first pass and look at what do we have on here that actually gives me confidence in buying this product, right? If you go through this process and you realize that, hey, actually, there's really nothing that we're providing customers for them to trust us, well, you may have or it may hint at a trust issue. Next, we'll want to look at clarity, right? So this is something that sometimes brand owners, VPs of e-commerce, directors of e-commerce, or anyone working in a brand have a hard time seeing because we're so ingrained into a specific product and into a brand that sometimes it's hard to see beyond that, right? So we want to look at, are the offers clearly being communicated? The next steps, the product, how it works. So this is where the information hierarchy, the product descriptions, all of that is very important. Then comes usability, the flow of actions, the user interface, right? Is navigation easy to use? How's the checkout process? What about filtering? What about product discovery? What about the mobile experience? How is that usability? Then the next step is really to dive into persuasion. The elements that ultimately leverage, the emotions of the customer, right? Now, this one is a tricky bit because I say, you'll want to look at, is there any type of urgency messaging, scarcity indicator, action focused elements? Now, for a lot of people, this can easily cheapen the brand if done wrong, right? Countdown timers often cheapen brands and won't necessarily help conversions in the long term, unless they're used well maybe in the span of a promotion. But what other elements, limited edition products maybe, or what else do we have that could push customers to make a purchase? Then we want to focus on offer, right? The actual offers, the upselling, the bundles, the pricing, the shipping thresholds, the cross sells, the gift with purchase. How is that going? And then ultimately relevancy. So if we look, for example, at the actual ads, and then we look at the landing page or whatever page or what the customer is seeing when they're landing on the website, right? Is the expectation being met? Is what would someone expect to see after they click on an ad? So that's the first step. You want to evaluate your website and go through your website as a customer, but you want to do a pass for each of those pillars to make sure that there's nothing really obvious that is stopping customers from buying. Now, if you do find potential issues, it doesn't mean that you have to go and test them right away, but write them down because those will be your starting points for your research. So that's one, heuristic analysis. Step number 2 is the competitor analysis. Now, so many brands go about this the wrong way. The competitor analysis is not to understand what your competitors are doing and what you're not doing and how you should copy them. Absolutely not. Now, here's the reality. Your competitors may not have any idea of what they're doing. They may also be A/B testing, maybe they're not. What they're doing may not be the right move. And I know the grass always looks greener on the other side, but I've seen multiple instances of brands blindly copying competitors and ultimately realizing it was the wrong move. What you want to do with your competitor analysis, and this is exactly how we do it at SplitBase, is to understand first and foremost the gaps in the value propositions and to also understand what's the frame of mind that most of the customers browsing your website, if they've shopped through competing websites, what type of information could they be looking for? What could they expect? How will they compare with competing products, right? So that's what you want to do. So it's really about understanding the messaging gaps. So for example, how are competitors communicating the outcomes that their product helps the customer achieve? How are they communicating the benefits, right? How are they addressing the objections? Or what objections do they believe they need to address, right? And how are they talking with the audience? Are they talking to the same customer demographic as you are talking to, right? So by identifying and mapping all this information, you may realize a couple things. One, you may realize that ultimately you're kind of just the same. And that will be a signal that you may want to find a way to differentiate yourself so you stand out and you win as the best option. The other alternative is it may signal gaps in the market where you'll find your competitors talk to certain customer demographics or in certain ways about your product, but there are other use cases or customer demographics that aren't being targeted by your competitors. And that is a huge opportunity for you to leverage, right? So that is the goal of the competitor analysis. Now, there's a bit of a cheat sheet as well. If you want to do this really quickly, it won't get you 100% of the way there, but you can technically use Claude Research or ChatGPT Deep Research to conduct this research for you. The way you're going to do this is you're going to have to write a prompt, and this prompt will have to explain exactly what you're looking for, which is what I just shared with you, the solution, objection, audience, and all those gaps. And ultimately, then you'll want to give it your competitors' URLs and then let it do the research. And ultimately, when it comes to elements and things like that, it's not too great, but in terms of actual messaging, it can do a pretty good job. Now, at this point, you'll have a bit of an understanding of where are some untapped opportunities in your funnel, what might be some issues that you need to investigate further. But we can't just dive into analytics right away, because here's the deal. At the end of the day, people, when it comes to conversion optimization, they always think of, what can we optimize that's persuasive, intuitive, so headlines, imagery, things like that. But at the end of the day, we've seen so many brands just have very low conversion rates because of tech issues. We had a $36 million fashion and apparel brand come to us at one point where they had a very below average performance on mobile for their cart to checkout step. And ultimately what happened is they wanted to redo the entire checkout flow. But as we dove deeper and did some session recordings, and we really looked at all the potential tech issues, we found out that the continue to checkout button was just not appearing for 15% of mobile users approximately, right? And that's not something you want to see or face when, you're trying to optimize for conversions and scale. Right. So ultimately, you'll want to make sure that your website is covered on every level from a technical standpoint. And this is why you're going to do a technical analysis before you even start thinking about AI tools, A/B testing, and all of that. You'll want to make sure you open your website and test the checkout flows and the main purchasing flows on your most popular browsers, on the different most popular screen sizes, on the most popular device types, and then you'll want to do a speed analysis. That alone might reveal some tech issues that can be fixed rather quickly and can increase conversions. We don't want to swim here against the current, so it's pointless to test the headline if at the end of the day, the biggest issue hurting your conversion rate is a tech issue. Am I right? Now, once you've done the technical analysis, the competitor analysis, and the heuristic analysis, this is where the slightly more sexy research comes in. And this is where insights are going to become maybe a bit more interesting as well. Because we're going to be looking at the first part of our testing trifecta, the analytics. And that alone can give you some really great insights for what A/B tests to run, but also what's working and what's not working with your website. So let's dive into Google Analytics. Now, whether you're using Google Analytics or another analytic platforms, the terms are mostly similar. But the first step is you want to look at your funnel stages, right? Ultimately, I think this is rather simple to do. You can use Looker. You can do it by pulling data through BigQuery. You can get this data directly in Google Analytics. No matter the tool you're using, this is something that you can do. And the easiest way to get started is to just break down your funnel stages. So for example, what you want to do is you want to look at, okay, how many people go from your homepage to a product page? Alternatively, right, if you're using landing pages or you're sending traffic to product pages, to landing pages, to collection pages, you want to look at what is that landing page. And you want to look at how many people land on one of your landing pages and then proceed to the products. Now, you'll want to know that percentage because ultimately we may find out at one point that we have a product discovery problem if that's the weakness in the funnel. The second step is you want to look at, okay, from the people who are seeing the products, how many of those people are actually adding to cart, right? That will be your add to cart rate. So make sure you write that number as well. Then you'll want to look at your cart to checkout conversion rate. How many people add to cart and then actually proceed to checkout? And then finally, how many people started their checkout and then completed their purchase? The goal of breaking down your funnel like this is to understand which stage is the weakest. And now, when you're looking at this with all traffic sources combined, right, the reality is averages lie. So, what I mean by that is without segmenting your data, your funnel may look generally healthy, or you may have one area in your funnel that could have a big dip or a big, a really great, outstanding performance, but it's hiding real issues that affect maybe where you're spending the most money, like paid social, right? So, what you want to do is you ultimately want to segment this funnel that you just built. You'll want to look at it by different traffic sources. Then you'll want to segment it by device type. You'll want to segment it. This is not about segmenting. You'll want to segment all this funnel by those two traffic sources. Then you also want to look at what are the other highest converting paths, what are the highest bounce rates, and what are the highest exit rates. Okay. Now, by doing this, you're guaranteed to find a couple things. For example, you may see that your funnel stage is performing well, but for paid social, you have one step specifically that's underperforming. That will highlight one area that you should focus on. The goal of the analytics analysis is to get a quantitative measure of where the weaknesses lie on your website, so you know where to focus your efforts. Because if you try to improve everything all at once, it'll be very hard to move forward and actually make progress. The next step is your web analytics analysis through, either Google Analytics, through any other analytics platform you're using. The first step, and the goal of this step, is really to identify where is your funnel the weakest. Because if you try to optimize and improve everything all at once, that's a surefire way to make zero progress, right? Think about that. When you're setting quarterly business goals, ultimately you look at what you want to move the needle on the most, you set a goal, and you aim for that, correct? That's the exact thing that you want to reproduce with your analytics. And the first step in doing that is through building a funnel. So you'll want to identify your different funnel stages and get the percentages for each of your steps. So the first step is looking at, okay, from people who land on your website, how many of those people actually end up to a product page? Now, a landing page in this case can be an actual standalone product page or landing page, sorry. It could also be a home page. It could also be a collection page or PLP, right? How many people who land on the site outside of a product page end up visiting a product page? You'll want to get that percentage, because this, if your percentage is quite low, or if this is the weakest area of your funnel, could highlight a product discovery issue. Now, once you've done that, you'll want to look at the next step, which is out of the people that visit a product page, how many people end up adding to the cart? Again, if this is the weakest area of your funnel, well, maybe there are some issues with the actual product pages, the information on your product pages, how you're communicating the differences between the different products that may lead to analysis paralysis, right? So add to cart rate is really helpful in understanding the other issues that may exist when it comes to both product discovery and the actual content of your product pages. Once you found your add to cart rate, you'll want to look at, okay, how many people actually go from their cart to checkout, right? If you have a very high add to cart rate, but then ultimately very few people continue to checkout, right? You have a cart abandonment problem. And there are very specific things that you can do to diagnose that and to fix that. But the first step is to diagnose if that is indeed an issue for your brand. The next step is ultimately from checkout to purchase, right? So from the people that continue to check out, how many end up completing their purchase? In this case, right, if you have an issue with this funnel stage, maybe the issues are around shipping costs that are revealed in the checkout flow. Maybe it's with, shipping locations where you ship to, and maybe you're advertising to groups of people that live outside of where you ship, right? Those are all examples that I've seen in the past. So you want to deconstruct that funnel. Now, the reality is a lot of people stop at this funnel breakdown, but averages lie. Because without segmenting your data, one area of your funnel may look okay, but when you divide it and you look at different device types or different channels, you may realize that while your funnel generally looks healthy, well, maybe your paid media funnel, where you're spending money and where you're aiming to get the best ROAS and acquisition cost, maybe you'll find the specific weakness with that one channel or with other channels, right? And that means you will have to go and investigate a little further, but you'll have a clear idea of what is causing those performance issues you're seeing. Alternatively, right, one area may be underperforming because of a high volume of low quality traffic. So it hides, the averages. It hides the truth behind your numbers. But if you remove, this low quality traffic, you may realize that at the end of the day, your funnel is doing pretty well, and you don't have as big of a conversion issue that you thought if you remove those weird one-time traffic issues. So what you'll want to do is you want to take this funnel stage and then you want to segment it mostly by traffic source, but also by device type, right? Once you segment all of that, it will reveal the numbers behind the averages. I'll give you, a great example here. For example, the subscription flow is something that we've helped Dr. Squatch with a lot. And ultimately, the optimization program that we run for Dr. Squatch helped generate close to $10 million in additional yearly revenue. And ultimately, the way that we optimize this subscription flow was really by breaking down the funnel, right? So if you have bundle builders and subscription flows, you need to deconstruct your funnel the same way as you would for your main site funnel. And by doing this, right, we were able to identify exactly which step of the subscription flow led to the highest abandonment rate. And that allowed us to focus in on the test ideas to resolve that issue. And then as we resolved those challenges, we were able to focus on the next step and the next step. And that led to iterative improvements that drove big results for the brand. Now, I could spend an entire video or hours talking about how to use your analytics to find issues. But apart from your funnel, you may also want to dive into your highest converting path, look at purchasers, and then look at, where do they come from? What actions do they typically take? What pages do they visit, right? This is a great way to understand the best path to purchase. You'll also want to look at your pages that have the highest bounce rates, because at the end of the day, if you're spending a bunch of money on certain landing pages or pages where you've got 90% of people bouncing, well, then you've only got 10% of that traffic you've paid for left to convert, right? So if you have a bounce rate issue and you have trouble retaining people on your website, that may be something you'll want to focus on. Maybe it's testing a different page, testing different hero messaging. You'll want to retain more people. And then similarly, you'll want to look at the highest exit rates, right? What are the pages that most people are leaving your website from? If there's any specific pages that leads to an exit, well, maybe there's something there that, triggered them off and made them leave. So you'll want to look at those paths first. Now, Google Analytics and behavioral analytics are not everything, right? Because when it comes to direct-to-consumer e-commerce, well, we're also talking about profit optimization, right? How can we boost LTV? How can we boost AOV? And in order to identify areas of opportunities, you can dive into Shopify Analytics. And a great little hack is you can actually use Shopify Sidekick to ask questions that will reveal those numbers for you if you're not familiar with how to build reports in Shopify Analytics. So the couple things that you'll want to check first, and there's the list can be a lot longer, but try to figure out what's the first product bought from a first-time customer that leads to the highest LTV and returning customer rate. Now, the reason why this is helpful is because when you identify that first product that leads to highest LTV and returning customer rate, you can take that and build, entry offers using this. And then if your goal is to increase new customer acquisition, you want to make sure that those customers are coming back, right? So by identifying that first product, it'll give you guidance as to which products to use on your landing pages to convert first-time customers and to ensure they're coming back. Now, if you're trying to optimize upsells or create bundles or create cross-selling flows, right? What are the products most frequently bought together? Now, I know a lot of tools like Rebuy and so on does have AI recommendations, but they're not perfect. And sometimes there's some missing logic and context that the AI can't know about or just doesn't know about. So do your own research and identify what are the products that customers often buy together, but also look at what are the products most often bought on the second purchase, right? So if you have customers coming back and then they're buying a product that maybe they could have bought in the first purchase, well, products often bought in the second purchase is a good opportunity for cross-sells or upsells or bundles as well, right? And if you can sell that product typically bought in the second purchase, if you can sell that in the first purchase, well, you'll likely save on, logistics and shipping costs. So, that can also improve the customer experience and increase your AOV at the same time. Now, you'll also want to dig a little deeper into returning customer versus new customer behaviors, because those are two very different segments, right? Your new customers may be looking for very specific products. So for example, if you sell barbecues, right, new customers might be a bit more interested in buying, a barbecue, whereas returning customers that have already bought may be more interested in barbecue accessories, right? By better understanding those behaviors, it creates a bit of a path to potential personalizations. So really try to understand those behaviors as much as you can. Now, once we're done with web analytics and Shopify analytics, that's when we're going to want to dive a little deeper through mouse tracking, right? So at this point, you've identified what are the weak pages and weak areas of your funnel. Now is the time to understand why. Why are those areas not performing? And then using those data points, we're going to be able to start forming a hypothesis. So let's look at mouse tracking analysis. First, scroll maps. So scroll maps are great, and especially to understand, if people are actually reading your pages. So what you'll want to look for is this, right? So if you have a very sudden or quick changes in color, that's a red flag. If you've got a slow, gradual change, which is not pictured here, but that will show that people are taking the time to actually read the page or to scroll down. So you want to look at quick changes as a potential red flag. Now, one of our pro tips and one of my favorite ways to use scroll maps is, one of the typical issues, if you're running a new landing page and you're using ad traffic to send traffic to it, right? Well, of course, you're going to want to run that test until you have enough transactions and conversions to see if, you can actually rely on that data and make a decision on whether the landing page is converting or not. That said, that can take between 2 to 4 weeks. And sometimes we don't really have that time. And a good way to just identify really, really early on if your landing page is going to perform, you can look at the actual scroll maps. So For example, after a few hundred or ideally a few thousand visits to your landing page, look if people are actually scrolling down your landing page. And if people aren't scrolling and they're abandoning early, right? What that may signal is that your page is lacking relevancy. So that means your top of landing page, your hero section may not be relevant to the person reading the page. It doesn't drive enough curiosity. It doesn't really hook them into reading the rest of the page, right? So what happens is when we find a really big issue where no one's really scrolling down this landing page, well, instead of just waiting the 2 to 4 weeks for a landing page test to be done, sometimes what we'll do is we'll stop the test and we're going to make some changes to the hero. We're going to relaunch the test and then we're going to keep monitoring. And our goal is to get slightly more people to scroll down the landing page. This is particularly important with advertorials and also listicles, but with any other type of landing pages as well. Once you get a slight improvement in scroll behaviors, then you let your test run for the 2 to 4 weeks, and at least you'll probably save to yourself a couple of weeks and a couple unnecessary iterations of the page that you would have only found out after 4 weeks. The second thing to do is make sure you segment that data, right? So ultimately, if you're only looking at scroll map data for one landing page and your only traffic source is, paid traffic, for example, that won't be an issue. But if you're looking at, your product pages, your home page, or collection pages, right? Look at your heat map data and scroll maps data. Look at the performance based on their different traffic sources for the different campaigns you're running and for the different devices. And you may see drastically different behaviors. Now, a second thing that you can do using the same tool most of the time would be your click maps, right? So click maps allow you to see what people are clicking on. So what you'll want to watch for here are elements that you think are important to the purchase, but that aren't getting any clicks, right? You'll also want to look at elements that aren't clickable that customers may be clicking on. For example, here, we're seeing a lot of people click on easy returns. Potentially, right? Potentially people are looking to get more information on the return policy, or it's not really clear if returns are free because it says easy returns. So people think that they can click on this and potentially open a modal. Well, that could become a hypothesis, right? What if we make shipping or the return policy a little easier to understand because this signals that people are looking for more return information, and that will, give them more confidence in making the purchase. So those are things that you want to look at. And then if you're using heatmap.com, which draws correlation between clicks or scrolls and purchases and conversion rate. So for example, here, right, if people are clicking on certain elements, you can see, okay, did that lead to any purchases? How did people who click on this end up converting? And then what's the revenue per session and revenue per click, right? You can use this data to understand what elements are important, because the biggest danger with click maps is sometimes people think that clicking means it's valuable, but it's not because people click on something that it means they're more likely to purchase, or it's not because they don't click on something that they're more likely to purchase. So if you're using heatmap.com, for example, you can get a very clear idea of whether that click was worth it or that element, contributes to the purchase. Now, you do want to be careful not to over-optimize for just a few clicks. I've seen people completely misread heat maps where ultimately they see people clicking on certain elements and then they go and they start making changes. But know that, you're not observing a pattern unless it's actually a pattern. It's not because you've got a couple people clicking on things that it means that it's an issue if that thing isn't clickable, right? Ultimately, patterns only really start to emerge when we've got 50 or 100 or even 1,000 clicks. The second danger with heat maps is to over-interpret the data, right? Like I said, heat maps are just facts. It just shows us what people are clicking on and not clicking on, but it's not telling us why. So be careful not to interpret why people are clicking on things. And then one last word of warning, right, is that really text heavy sections or image heavy sections may not really get any clicks, but it doesn't mean they're not important, right? For example, a user might need to read a lot of text, they may need to browse through images, but reading or observing doesn't require them to click on any of those things. So it doesn't mean, we don't know what people actually read or really saw. And click maps are not meant to tell us what people read. It's really just what are people clicking on. So just be careful with that. Now, here's a quick case study for how we used heat maps in order to increase landing page conversions by 16% for a very well-known 8-figure supplement brand. One of the things that we did was that ultimately they had a really good landing page. And we did notice through some survey research that the messaging wasn't necessarily relevant or didn't really align with customers were telling us in terms of the benefits they were getting from the products, in terms of the outcomes they wanted. So we wanted to change the hero message. So we changed the top section of the landing page. Now, each iteration of that would have taken 3 to 4 weeks of testing in order to get solid results. But instead of waiting that entire time, what we've done is we've used Scroll Maps to understand if the new hero was actually resonating with customers. In the 3 to 4 week period, we realized that people were not really scrolling or interacting with the hero section with the new messaging that we put in. So we iterated a couple times, twice in that 3 to 4 week period. And eventually, at one point we reached a point where scroll rates really got better. And we realized we found a message that resonated with people. So at that point, we just left the test run and the test was a winner, right? So that is a great way of using scroll maps to save you time and obviously get some results. We also realized that there was a carousel element that was showing the effect of taking the supplements over the course of 6 months. But we saw that very few people actually clicked on those arrows to get to the 6th month, right? So we redesigned it to make it more concise. It didn't require people to actually interact with that carousel, but we also knew that that information was important because those were questions that were asked by customers in the surveys and the polls. So through those changes, we got a 16% increase in conversion rate, and the impact was over $100,000 per month in additional revenue generated. So don't sleep on using heat maps and scroll maps as a way to better understand the issues that you've identified in your analytics analysis. Now, once you've done that, you'll want to get inside the minds of your customers, right? Mouse tracking and web analytics are analytics, they're numbers, but your customers are human beings. And, when people are shopping on your website, when they're abandoning their cart, right? It's all due to something that they're actually thinking about. It's due to concerns, emotions, needs, wants, and so on. So it's our job to better understand those factors in order to have the best A/B test. Otherwise, if we stop at the analytics, we're still going to guess what happened or why customers abandoned. So we're going to have a much higher success rate if we actually understand the customer. So let's dive into one of our first research methods on the human side of things, which is the website poll, right? So website polls are a fantastic way to get better information and hesitations and customer questions pre-purchase. So it looks like this. So this is a poll we ran on a deodorant brand, right? We asked on the product page, were you able to find the information you were looking for? We asked yes, no. And then if people said no, we asked what information were you looking for? And ultimately, that really helped us better understand what information was missing on the product page. You can also ask something like, is there anything holding you back from buying this product? Yes, no. If people say no, you ask, what's holding you back from buying this product? Those polls, by the way, were done through Hotjar. You can also use a Kendo. Heatmap.com will soon have a feature for this. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to set your polls on very specific pages, right? Either on your product pages or specific areas of your funnel where you found that there's a bit of a weakness through your analytics audit. Now, most of the time, we run these on product pages, and we will trigger on page abandonment on desktop. So if someone is about to leave the website, we'll trigger the poll. And on mobile, because we can't track the mouse going to the back button, what happens is we'll look at the average time spent on page in the analytics, and then we'll trigger the poll right about that time. So one of my favorite use cases for this, or case studies, I should say, was how we've used polls to increase INH Hair's conversion rate by 26%. INH Hair sells hair extensions, wigs, and clip-on ponytails. And ultimately, we asked that question. We asked, what question do you have about this product? And we saw that there was a bit of a weakness with the add to cart rate, but we didn't really understand why. By running that poll, we found out that most customers just didn't understand how the clip-on ponytails worked, right? It was a clip-on ponytail, so it seemed obvious that people would understand, but no, they actually wondered how it would stay on, how it worked. So by using this insight, we iterated on a couple different tests where we added videos, GIFs, and ultimately this is the final version that exists on the website today. There's a clear how to use section. And just by better explaining how the product worked, it led to a 26% increase in conversion rate. And that helped the brand by quite a bit. So this is how you can use polls. Polls are great to identify objections and issues pre-purchase, but your existing customers are often the best source of insights. And this is quite possibly the most valuable part of our conversion research process. What you'll want to do is you'll want to create a survey. We use Typeform, and you'll want to send your survey to purchasers from the past 1 to 2 months, ideally people that have already received their products. And you'll want to ask questions like, how is your life better thanks to our products? What made you buy, this product? What questions or hesitations did you have before making a purchase? What can you tell us about yourself? What's going on in your life that made you want to buy this product? What's most frustrating to you when shopping for this? How would you describe this product? Now, those questions are all kind of crazy if you think about it. They're open-ended, right? And for a statistician or someone who's hoping to build charts, this is not the type of survey that you'll use to build charts. Those answers will all be open-ended. The reality here is that we're not trying to build charts, or we're not trying to make this a quantitative poll or survey at all. What we're trying to do here is really just understand how our customers thinking. If we were to include, multiple choice answers, we would be assuming what the customers would answer. But that is not the goal. The goal is really for them to tell us in their own words, their responses. Now, by doing this, we're able to, get insights on how people think about your product, how they talk about your product in a way that we wouldn't be able to do so otherwise. I'll show you this case study from MoonPod, where we built a listicle landing page that added 6 figures in additional monthly revenue, that helped the brand scale meta ads, and increase conversion rates quite significantly with cold traffic. But this was built mostly using a customer survey. So let's go through it. You look at the headline, and it says 5 reasons stressful times demand this anti-gravity beanbag. Now, stressful times was used because this survey was actually run around the time of COVID, and people were telling us in the survey that they were feeling very, very stressed. And they really wanted to relax. And this is one of the main reasons why they bought a MoonPod. So 5 reasons stressful times was very relevant. Now, when we're building a landing page, whether it's a listicle, an advertorial, or any other type of landing page, we want to create curiosity, right? And this anti-gravity beanbag is really the curiosity creator. That was kind of the hook that will make people wonder, what is an anti-gravity beanbag? The next sentence, whether you work on your moonpod or use it to chill, it's the perfect place to banish stress. This is 100% taken from the survey. For example, work and chill were the two most commonly named use cases for using moonpod. And then banish stress is ultimately what customers were looking to do with moonpod. And finally, in the main paragraph here, moonpod is a zero gravity beanbag chair that's made for the busy, the stressed, and the overwhelmed. So the busy, the stressed, the overwhelmed, that's how people describe themselves when we asked, how would you describe yourself? Or what can you tell us about yourself? And then why is that? Because it makes you feel weightless and unburdened by the pressures you face every day. So again, we're repeating the desired outcome and the voice of customer. The actual images here, shows people sitting on it in different ways. Same thing here. We identified through research that, people asked a lot of questions around how they could actually sit or use the moonpod. So we added a section here where it showed people just sitting in different ways. Now, so it was really just about addressing that most important question that people had. We also addressed, that you can watch it, you can use it to recline, to watch a show, or to nap, right? Again, common use cases from the polls and also from the customer survey. Now, we also asked existing customers, why they loved this product. And a lot of people said that it was very easy to move around. They have kids. So we've addressed that. And in the polls, a lot of people wondered about whether it was light or small and how much takeaway space. We also saw that a lot of people lived in apartments. So we addressed the space concern as number 2, and light enough for a child to pick up and move around. That was addressed because a lot of people said they had kids. Then here, the top benefit mentioned by customers is relief from stress and anxiety. So this was really used because customers were mentioning it, but it also provided, if we kind of go back to the competitor analysis, right? None of the competitors talked about beanbags as a way to feel better, as a, emotional benefit type of thing, to relieve stress and anxiety. Everyone talked about beanbags as just a beanbag, a way to sit. So by targeting this, stress and anxiety, not only did we align with what customers were saying, but we also created a competitive advantage. Finally, point number 4, it can help reduce uncomfortable or pressure pain points. That was another thing that was mentioned in the survey. And then we don't want to address price too early on. We want to convince people of the value of the product first in this situation, but we also realized that there were a lot of price misconceptions. A lot of people thought the product was too expensive, but people that said the product was too expensive had never really comparison shopped for beanbags before. Turns out most of the alternatives are a lot more expensive. On the flip side, people who bought the product actually found moonpod to be quite cheap compared to other alternatives. So we wanted to address that here, and that's why we built this comparison chart. Ultimately, we also finished here with testimonials that directly targeted customer questions, needs, and personas. So they were handpicked and added here. This landing page, as I said, was a big driver of success for the brand, but it was all built not through guesses, but through actual words of customers. Now, one word of warning, because you may be tempted to do that, is never export all your survey responses in a CSV and just upload the entire doc to an AI to analyze. AI tools are incredibly terrible at this. So survey analysis, if you have multiple questions in your survey, it just really can't be done accurately with Claude or ChatGPT. It'll make things up, hallucinate. So the best way of doing this still today is to manually read all the responses, create some categories or most common themes for each response, for each question, and then you count how many responses fit the theme for each of the questions. There are ways to use AI to help with this. It's a much bigger topic, but essentially this is how you can analyze customer surveys. Once customer surveys are done, something that can be helpful as well are chat logs and customer support tickets. What you want to look for are repeated objections or confusion, missing information that customers are expressing, right? Those are all hints of information that you may want to add or form or use as part of a test hypothesis. You also can do review mining, and you can mine reviews, not just your reviews, but also your competitors' reviews. You can do this on the brand level or also on the product level. But what you want to do is ideally is you want to look at praises, right? So you'll want to look at, okay, well, what are people saying, to praise our brand? What language are they using? So for example, oh, the packaging was beautiful, fast shipping, feels softer than I expected. You'll want to look at complaints, right? So for more negative reviews, what are the complaints that people are expressing? How do they talk about it? What are the transformations? This is one of my favorite things because it really points at the use cases, right? So for example, oh, I finally got a good night's sleep. Now I feel confident wearing this. It helped me save time every morning. Those transformations are patterns in the customer's voice that you can use in your copy that can really help sell your product. You also want to look at comparisons, right? So if they switch from another brand, if they compare it to another brand, that can give you insights as to what customers would typically compare your product with. And then you also want to look at the motivators and the use cases, right? So if a lot of people are commenting that they bought your product as a gift, for example, maybe that gives us an insight that, hey, maybe we should try upselling premium gift packaging, right? So what you want to be careful with, though, when looking at reviews and doing this review mining is be careful not to subconsciously try to confirm your own biases. And this is true for the surveys and the polls and any type of qualitative research, right? You want to make sure that you probably have some expectations as to why people are buying and why they're not buying. And we're going to subconsciously try to get validation for that, right? But we don't want to do that because it may hide actual patterns. So don't over-index what may have been mentioned only a few times. Try to count how many times things have been mentioned, and that's going to help a lot with just establishing priority in terms of concerns and things to address. One way you can do review mining really quickly is to just really export your reviews into a CSV, convert the CSV into JSON for better AI readability, then upload that JSON file to Claude and ask for it to analyze the reviews using those factors. Then do this for specific products or specific product collections or even brand reviews, and it will help you get about 90% of the way there with understanding what are people saying in those reviews. Now, just to give you an idea of how we've used reviews and chat logs with this landing page for Laura Geller, which led to a 43% increase in conversion rate and also really helped them scale and accelerate paid social acquisition. Well, if you look at this landing page, a lot of people would say, hey, there's quite a bit of text. Well, at the end of the day, what we've done is we understood that the customers were looking for very, very specific things. For example, if you read the headline, goodbye heavy, cakey foundation that settles into lines and wrinkles or cause breakouts. It's a bit wordy. And yes, this was tested multiple times. But when we looked at both the reviews and what was coming up often is the transformation that we were seeing. The use case is people felt like they could finally ditch their cakey foundation. They felt like they finally found a solution. They felt like they got a solution that didn't cause breakouts, that didn't settle into fine lines and wrinkles, right? So we just really wanted to call out all those main things that customers were expressing. Ultimately, we use this information to write the copy and just better understand the hierarchy of content. For example, shade matching was one of the biggest questions and objections. And so therefore, there's been a lot of focus put into shade matching, but we really made sure that we also talked about the benefits of this product and why it was better than the competing products. And like I said, this helped increase their conversion rate by 43%. Now, this is really, for the most part, the qualitative research process that will lead you to better understanding your customer, better understanding how they talk, and it will help you get clarity on how to write copy that speaks to your customer. There are still a couple things, however, that you can do on a usability level to better understand and diagnose, how to improve your overall website. So, when it comes to usability analysis, there's 4 methods that we use the most here at Splitbase. The first one is session recordings. The second is usability testing. The third is 5-second test. And the last one is card sorting. So, for session recordings, now the first thing I'd like to say is instead of wasting your time watching just anything in 100 sessions, of really anything, look at your analytics analysis. Look at the funnel stages that were the weakest, the pages that were underperforming, and focus your watching session on those funnel stages and on those pages. Watch over 100 sessions and don't put too much importance on one issue that you may notice, right? Like if it looks like someone's having an issue, don't focus too much on it, right? Unless you see it happen multiple times. Patterns are what we're looking for, not one-off instances. And that's why watching at least 100 sessions is a must. When it comes to session recordings, what you'll want to do is ultimately look at rage clicks, right? Are people trying to click quite a bit on elements that may not be clickable? Is there anything that's supposed to be interactive, but that's not working? Where are the times or when are the times that, there's a scroll jank, that people are scrolling up, scrolling down? Where are they paying the most attention? Are there any issues? Look for form abandonment and input struggles as well. Do people have a hard time filling forms? Is there content potentially not being saved? And also just look at, if people are clicking on things that aren't interactive. I gave you this example earlier where when we did a technical audit, we found out that about 15% of mobile users did not see the continue checkout button in the cart. Well, at the end of the day, one of the main ways we've identified that was through session recordings. We knew there was an issue with this flow. We weren't able to reproduce it. But when we looked at hundreds of session recordings, it became very clear that for about 15% of mobile users, we had a pretty massive tech issue, which was just the checkout button wasn't appearing. And that allowed the brand to resolve the issue quickly and ultimately recover all those orders. Now, for usability testing, when you conduct usability testing, you can recruit people in your target demographic and ask them to go through your funnel. You need to ask them to do specific action items, what most customers would click on. You need to ask them to add products to their cart. So give them very specific tasks to achieve and look for confusion or issues. For example, if you have a subscription flow and you're trying to optimize that, get people to go through your subscription flow. Look for where they may get confused. Look for where things may become overwhelming. That may reveal issues or opportunities for optimization. 5-second tests are great. One of the things that it does is that it tests perception, right? It helps understand how do people perceive the brand? What are visitors seeing first and what do people remember? Essentially, 5-second test the 5-second test is you show a screenshot for 5 seconds and you ask a question to the person who's seen that screenshot for 5 seconds. And it'll give you their thought that they were able to, gather in 5 seconds. And it can be very helpful to understand if people are seeing what we want them to see, or if people are thinking or perceiving the brand or the site in the way that we want them to perceive it. And finally, navigation is very often something that brands are looking to optimize, and it's very often something that gets overcomplicated. So one way to just kind of get a bit more data into building navigation is to use card sorting. And card sorting allows you to have a group of customer, you give them, all your different product categories, and you ask them how they would group those together. And it really allows you to understand if customers are thinking about product categories the same way we are. And maybe the answer is a big no. So one way that we've used this was to rebuild and reorganize the navigation for Fontana Candle. The brand needed a full website redesign. that would elevate the brand, but that would also increase conversions. And they have a lot of different product categories, and that could be a bit confusing at times. So we used card sorting, we've used session recordings and usability tests to really understand the best navigation hierarchy. Navigation was simplified, and once a new website launched, that plus other changes ultimately led to a conversion rate increase of about 11%. And that really helped the brand scale as well. All right, now that you've got all that data, your role is to find the patterns. You need to find the patterns of where are people getting stuck? What are people saying? What are people thinking? And you should have now a clear picture of what's happening on your website and why it's happening just by having this analytics and this human qualitative data. Now, your role is really to take those data points and to take those patterns and to ultimately build solutions to the problems and to the opportunities that you've identified. Your testing will be focused on finding the right solution and implementation of those fixes or opportunities. Now, of course, at that point, not all tests are going to be winners, right? The actual widely available industry statistics on A/B test win rates is that about only 1 out of 7 A/B tests will win. That said, if you work with a conversion optimization specialized agency and they're doing this entire process, or if you're doing this entire process, you should get a much higher win rate. And we're usually seeing anywhere between 30 to 45% being achievable through this process, and sometimes even higher. This is a process that works. It's the process behind Dr. Squatch's conversion optimization efforts that help them go from a small $1 million brand to making hundreds of millions. This is the process we've been using for the past decade to achieve hundreds of millions of dollars in combined additional revenue across our clients for the past decade. Now, how you use this, how you implement this is really in your hands. And if you want to have access to this Fig Jam, this full process, just click on the link in the description to get the free download of this process. And if you need help from an agency to do this entire process and get the test ideas for you and to run the test, just go to splitbase.com to see how we can help. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. If you want more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe.